on Profit Meets Purpose, Financing Sustainability. So this morning we've heard a call to action on circularity, SME greening, and development funding. Now let's explore how we can turn that into bankable next steps for Asia's textile ecosystem. We'll also explore how policy translates to P&L, how lenders underwrite brown to green, and where development, finance, and venture can help get us to scale. We've got 45 minutes together, including 15 minutes for your questions, and I know you'll have plenty to ask. So there will be a QR code on screen at some point, which is a Slido QR. Please scan those and send those questions in as we go along. We'll try to bring as many of those into the conversation during the Q&A portion. And let's get started. So to our distinguished panelists, please introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about your organizations. Where do you operate in the ecosystem? And how do you approach profit and purpose? Maybe I'll start with my left, Dr. Rene.
I already spoke largely, so I think what I would maybe like to highlight is the ASEAN Circular Economy Business Alliance, which is a kind of an alliance of organizations, businesses which are committing to circular economy from an ambitious perspective and walk the talk, and some of the businesses which I showcased are part of that. So I think there is a lot of scope for basically coalitions of the willing, if one may use that word, to jointly navigate the sustainability, the circularity challenges, and so on. And I think that's what is very important with that is also to look for the local solutions. So we need to get away from the situation that we just see circularity as something which is imposed by the global north on the global south manufacturers, and actually showcase that there is a lot to gain for manufacturers in the global south.
Very helpful, thank you. Phil?
Hey everyone, my name is Phil. I'm a partner at Main Sequence, which is Australia's deep tech venture capital fund. We were co-founded by the Australian National Science Agency, the CSIRO, and 8 years in, we have about $1 billion, which we are managing, and all of our companies have got science at the core, and a big proportion of those companies are creating sustainable new manufacturing platforms. And textiles and fashion is a really important part of our portfolio, and we have a whole number of companies that are working together. I think the name of this panel is interesting because it's Profit Meets Purpose, and I think one of the things we've learned consistently, and you might say the hard way, is that there needs to be profit there. In my world, there's no green premium that people will endure. And so we're very focused on all the technologies that we are bringing to life, actually creating profit by being purposeful, creating sustainability, using less water, whatever it is that we're doing. We have companies that replace the dyeing systems with waterless technologies. We have infinite plastic recycling companies that, for example, can take a mixed fabric garment from Lululemon, who are one of their big customers, and actually depolymerize it back to the original monomers to be used infinitely. They call themselves an infinite recycling company. And we have a whole bunch of companies who make all kinds of different materials, different dyeing systems. And we'll talk more about that soon. But I think we find, in terms of how we work with the market, is it's more than just allocating capital to companies. It's actually working very, very proactively with other sources of capital. There's no way we can just do this with venture alone, or with customers alone, or with banks alone. And then working very closely with the actual supply chain itself, because it's a non-trivial sell for the companies. So how do we integrate? So that's me.
Super helpful. There's a few threads we'll pull on that, pun intended, as we go along. Michael and Aris, I think we've heard from you a little bit earlier some of the work your institutions are doing, but just briefly.
Okay, OCBC I introduced earlier is a Singapore-based bank with regional footprint. Commercial bank where I come from, we cover 4 markets: Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Indonesia. And the sustainability focus on commercial banking SME clients is really across the 4 markets. And thus far, I think we have seen huge take-up in sustainability solutions across our 4 markets. Just last year, 2024 versus 23, we have seen the growth in sustainable finance taken up by SMEs by 40% up. And earlier last year, we also introduced a program that's not just covering green, we are also equally focused on the social aspects. So last year on International Women's Day, we launched the Women Unlimited program, which is really a first in market for Singapore Bank to be targeting women entrepreneurs with dedicated support, not just in loans, not just in the reach within our franchise, it's also across the other regional markets.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks. I've just tested your patience with 15 or 20 minutes of a monologue, so I'll just keep it very short. But I think what makes ADB's work so interesting is that we can connect with actors represented on the stage here, and we do in many configurations with commercial banks, with venture capitalists, with providers of technical assistance. We do some of that through our own, but they're the specialists. So our job is really to empower them to do their job. And as far as profit is concerned, yes, there is a profit motive there, but as a development bank, we don't get bonuses. We reinvest everything into our projects.
Well, while you've got the mic, if we look ahead to the next 2 years, which are the top 2 or 3 regulatory or market shifts that are likely to have the biggest impact on Asian textile producers? Is it the EU Sustainable Textile Strategy, extended producer responsibility, digital product passports? How should financing solutions adapt in response to those state changes? And this is to all panelists, but maybe starting with Michael.
Yeah, so apart from a green transformation more generally, I think just traceability and transparency is going to be something very, very strong. And that's not only because of EU mandates. I think what starts as a mandate somewhere inevitably sometime translates into industry practice. Banks start asking those questions, investors start asking those questions, shareholders start, and the public and media start asking those questions, right? So it's not something somewhere far away that gets decided that then has an impact on us. It slowly starts to build a conversation that inevitably we need to find answers for in the region. And I think as far as traceability is concerned, or transparency of all of this, for example, we're working on a very interesting pilot program in Sri Lanka where we are creating a digital platform that allows SMEs without too much hassle to start uploading information, to start asking the types of questions of themselves that will be required by regulators later on. And through that platform, they're matched with experts, and it greatly facilitates the types of documentation that they will have to create going forward. I've seen estimates of the number of digital product passports that will have to be issued. I guess you issue a passport by 2030, and the number is over 60 billion, 60. That's a huge, huge number of passports. That's more than the amount of passports that people have, right, in the world, right? So this is a huge thing that will require a lot of effort by an ecosystem. But again, regulation might be the start. Practice will come later, and those questions will have to be asked sooner or later, I think.
Okay. Iris, would you like to add any perspectives?
So my comment is really not very different. Just that I think what all these innovations or all this new regulation means to the companies in the supply chain is really money. It's still money. So for all these early innovators, what they need is really the connection to the user, the money to scale up their investments. So I guess where I wanted to emphasize is really how can we catalyze all this innovation using venture debt. So where I wanted to emphasize is really sometimes it's not just you don't look at banks just for the loans. the bank also do collaborate with partners as well as create programs similar to a venture capitalist. We do take equity stake in our companies, in companies who invest in innovation, in technology. So I wanted to share one very quick example, which is a company based out of Singapore. They have a project that is turning waste to energy. So it's using biomass to power up certain manufacturing processes. And we do take a stake at the equity level for them to create that project. And that is quite impactful to us when the plant is ready by 2026.
I think for us, the various circularity policies, especially the European ones, have been transformational in terms of the changes that they've triggered in the market. The Infinite Nylon Recycling Company, for example, is being dragged into the market because of those policies. They've done a very big contract with Lululemon, under which they need to replace 20% of their entire fabric by 2030 with recycled nylon, which means when you sort of play that back, we literally need the first factory up and running by 2028. So there's a lot going on to actually make that happen. But by the time we're done, by the time we're at 2030, there will be a very real at-scale solution for nylon recycling because of that policy.
Interesting.
I would echo the calls for disclosure, transparency, digital product passport, and the corporate sustainability reporting directive. I haven't heard, but I think for sure there will be eco-design criteria for textiles entering Europe, and that's linked to that's the operationalization of the sustainable and circular textile strategy. So there will be issues on repairability, on washing, on extended use. So that will still certainly be there. I don't want to scare everyone off, but I think there's also what is on the horizon and maybe not yet fully realized, but there will be a ban on restrictions to dispose of unsold stock, and they will first start with electronics, but this will go to other product groups as well, and that could have a major implication as well. So if unsold stock is 10-15%, that might mean that if that needs to be used and cannot be disposed, there could be also quantitative reductions of what can be done. I would also like to say maybe also look local, because the ATIGA, the ASEAN Trade in Goods and Goods Agreement, sorry I got the abbreviation wrong, was signed up earlier this week for Southeast Asia, so there will be a framework to deal with remanufactured goods and with secondary materials, so there will be more easily to actually get some economies of scale in the ecosystem for sustainable and circular textiles.
Which is a great segue into the whole topic of digital product passports. For mills and brands exporting to the EU, what would you say are the essential data points they need to be capturing now to prepare for the digital product passports? For example, material composition, processes, impact, traceability.
Yeah, I think, and some of it is still under development, but essentially it will be an environmental product declaration for which there are already ISO standards. So a first proxy, it will be a rundown or optimized version of the ISO standards which are applying. So you will have to load the material composition, that will be the fiber, but it will also be your buttons and zippers and other components. It will have to include where it's being processed by who and with what kind of processes or what kind of dye stuffs are being used, what kind of detergents are being used, and then and how then the product can be sustainably used and also disposed at the end of the useful lifetime. And it will include the traceability, so it's not only the how was it done, but also who did it. Was it Jack or John, and where are they located, and so on. So it's potentially what you mentioned before, that it will be quite mind-boggling how many data points there is. So that is still, I guess, a little bit the practicality which the EU representative was also saying, that this is still to be worked out. But I think there could be loopholes. We would caution everyone to approach this as a marketing exercise. This is clearly not a marketing function. This is really about product design and manufacturing operations, and be precise, because the flip side of it is that there will also be liabilities of false declarations, and we see that there's a whole raft of legislation and litigation action on greenwashing in all its shades, because it's also it's not only the greenwashing but the greenwashing, other concepts there. So one has to be careful. So example, if we take recycled fishing gear, so is it ocean-based plastic or is it ocean-bound plastics? These will be really litigated parts. So ocean-bound plastics is found within 50 kilometers of the shore, and ocean-based is what is picked up in the ocean. And really some of these intricacies will expose also liabilities. So be precise. So don't try to take this as a paper exercise or as something. It will be, if not done properly, it could hit back.
I mean, if I was a business owner and I came to you with a question of Pareto principle, 80-20, what are the simple low-cost steps that I can start to take, or what should I not do?
You should take the main material, so it's the textile fiber and your zippers and buttons. So that would be 90-95% of it. Look also at the packaging. This is the plastic packaging. That would also be an important one. And then look at the total water, total energy. That would be a good starting point to start measuring. You can't disclose that as a comparative advantage, but you need to maybe start with some internal metrics, which are a little bit simpler than the external metrics, to get some traction, because ultimately the point is not to collect data, but to have data to improve. And
you can use.
To use and to improve. You don't want to report next year that you did the same as this year. Isn't it?
I've seen that a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, so that's super helpful and a great transition. And I'm going to continue my persona as that of the business owner, as you've outlined the what. Maybe Iris can help us a little bit with the how. Be interesting to get Iris's perspectives on how CBC is helping textile owners, SMEs, make this transition. What are the strengths and weaknesses of some of the products that you're putting out there in the market, and maybe share a little bit around how much of it is pull and how much of it is push from the market.
I think in the last few years, SME's mindset has really changed a lot, right? Even in the last 3 years, we can see that sustainability is no longer foreign to SMEs, even to the very small owners, business owners. They do know that there is a necessity to get into the game, and for now it still remains a competitive edge if they can do it better than their peers. It is not mandatory on them, and therefore I think the bank's role in supporting this movement is really in making the step easy, low cost, and low resources required on their manpower. So this is a very practical step that we think how we think we can motivate the SMEs to start this journey with us. I think in terms of the greenwashing risk, for SMEs, of course, there is no requirement. Neither are they big enough to attract the activists to hammer them. But of course, the bank, as we give out our green loans to support their agenda, we have to make sure that there is proper governance in place. So just now I mentioned the sustainability linked loan, where we tie up with partners like EcoVadis as well as ESGpedia. That's only the measurement tool. On top of measuring, you need to add in the assurance part. That's where we actually brought in Bureau Veritas to add the assurance, to make sure the data, ESG data, is really accredited. And it's done on an annual basis, so there is enough transparency and credibility to the data given to the bank. I guess that's how we.
Are there any nuances in how the underwriting process goes around, and how does that translate into pricing, and maybe some of the covenants that you would then put on the companies themselves?
Unfortunately, in Singapore or in this part of the world, underwriting standards is not very different, right? Whether you're green loan or green loan, there's no green lane to getting a loan from the bank. But I guess what is the difference is around, the pricing of the loan will be differentiated based on green loans. Typically, we do give a discount, especially for sustainability linked loan. It is set out as a covenant in the loan agreement. If you meet the performance standards or performance targets that is pre-agreed at the onset of the loan, then the X percentage of discount is to be given automatically. What is also attractive about sustainability linked loan is that we give you the discount, but if you don't meet the targets, we don't levy a penalty. So there's only upside, there's no downside. But along the way, I think the journey is the difficulty, right? It's really, after you set the target, how do you then continuously engage the companies, the SMEs, to move in the right direction? You can't wait 1 year later for the assessment to happen and realize that nothing has been done. So it is really a constant engagement with the business owner to make sure things that they've committed, the targets they've set, continuously, they are moving in the right direction.
Iris, I think, has mentioned some of the underwriting practices and hurdles. I mean, Michael, very helpful to get a sort of development bank's perspective. In practice, where does ADB's toolkit of blended finance, guarantees, credit lines, energy efficiency, wastewater, especially the ADB safeguards, move the needle most when it comes to textile clusters? What eligibility signals are you looking for? What KPIs? And are you looking for intentionality from some of the potential borrowers?
Yeah, that's a great set of questions. So I think the way to think about ADB is a kind of a force multiplier, right? So what we can do is that we can bring others together around an area and have them look at the business case, the business rationale for investing there, and we can help to de-risk it, right, for some providers of the capital. And that can be through environmental and social safeguard application. It can be through supporting a decarbonization plan inside a company. It can be for all manner of things that usually many financiers would not know or take the time to insist on. This is something that we could cover, and we can make those investments then certifiable, if necessary, by a third party as a green investment. That's usually an added value that we can provide. We don't usually, especially in the private sector, with private sector projects, we cannot finance more than 50% of a project, right? We need to see equity, so skin in the game from whoever we're working with, and also mobilize financing from other sources, right? So not just be the only financier, because it's not just about the project, it's about making an ecosystem supportive of those types of projects, right? Otherwise, you're just telling the story of one project. We want to work with banks, for example, to get them comfortable with certain types of investment, and then over time, they're able to do this much better than and they don't require ADB's financing or technical assistance anymore, because they ask the right types of questions. They can properly assess risks, price their instruments, and so on. And so, in order to get there, we need to see what is needed. Is it the cost of capital? Is it, for example, extending the tenor of a loan longer than what a commercial bank would be happy with? Is it a currency issue? Is it something where the technology is unproven in the local market and there needs to be some sort of performance guarantee linked to the financial instrument? So it's working with that, and really every project is a different story, right? And when we look at things like sustainability-linked loans, really, when people talk about green finance, it's often just corporate finance with a green tinge, right? We don't really look at the performance of the project itself. We say, oh, is this a credible debtor? And yes, it's a solid company, we'll give them money. Then they send back to us and say, yeah, we've done the green project. But that's something completely different than going down on a granular level and saying, this green project, how do we start doing project financing for that green project, where the green features of that project are actually translated into the financing structure, right? So this is what you start to do with sustainability-linked loans and bonds, and there are other instruments too. But you can link it to objective, verifiable, measurable improvements in environmental performance. Energy is an easy and low-hanging fruit because it's mainly energy bills, but you can link it to many other things: water use, water quality, the quality of chemical effluents, for example, generation of quality employment for women, etc. It just depends what metric you can implement and mutually agree on, and to be honest, also not spend too much time and effort measuring and monitoring, right? The metric should be something to help you and not just the ultimate thing that makes you want to do a project, right?
This is such valuable work, got such a large industrial base that can and should become a little bit more efficient. I think that it's a great segue to pivot to innovation. So what's coming down the pike that is going to be transformative, demonstrably transformative within the industry? And maybe this is one for Phil with your sort of innovation hat on. What are you seeing? You've mentioned a couple of interesting companies, but is it polymer recycling? Is it carbon negative fibers? Is it waterless dyeing? What's exciting you the most, and what should business owners be the most excited about?
I mean, I think we're looking for things which are going to be sort of decadal new technologies, which industry can just use for decades to come. They're not going to very, very quickly be irrelevant, and so it's things like replacing dyeing technology with something that's completely waterless. In our portfolio, we have a company called Zevco, which has a plasma dyeing technology. Think of it like a very large printer. The cost, so I talked about profit a little bit at the beginning. I mean, the critical part of the delivery from this business is that it should cost less than dyeing with heat and water and all the dye technologies we use today. And it's basically just the fabric just goes through this technology very, very quickly, so it goes just as fast. It's a lower cost, but there's zero water. So it's not an incremental change to the process. It's removing water from textiles. Now, where that gets interesting is, I think this question about how customers work with these companies is really important, because you probably won't get a loan off any of these guys to do it, because the risk is too great. Yeah, you guys kind of need it to be kind of the risk removed, right, until you're ready to give a loan. And that means there needs to be a bit of a lead-in from customers, just to start figuring out how they're going to sort of bring this online in a small way, how they're going to contribute to this technology becoming better, how they kind of share the risk a little bit. One of the big things customers can do, I mean, are there any textile mills in the room? Can I just see a show of hands? Yeah, great, thank you. So I think one of the things that might not be clear to customers is when a startup comes to you and says, I've got this great idea, no more water with your dyeing, what do you think? You're kind of looking at that thing, oh God, here's a startup, it's going to be risky, why should I work with them and risk the operations of my business? They need to prove it, then come and see me. But the most valuable thing you can do actually is not provide your money, it's actually figuring out an actual long-term plan for what it might look like with your business and this technology. And then people like me can fund it. Like, what the most common reason we say no is we say, tell me about your customers. And they say, well, the customers are just waiting for us to make something bigger, and so we're in a catch-22 situation, right? So the big challenge to you is, how can you lean into it? And it's not introducing an existential risk to your company, it's just put a bit of time into it and help the whole thing come online.
So you're saying that that's the value of a pilot?
Unbelievably valuable, like to do that. You just have to think about a pitch deck that would come to someone like me. If it says, with these 3 customers, we'll do this much next year, if that goes well, we'll do this much more next year, and if that goes well, we'll do this much more. That's so much more powerful than, here's the size of the market and we can have 1% of it. And then I think another example is we have a company called Ulu that make biopolymers to replace things like polyester threads, injection molded buttons, and so forth in fashion. I think to one of Renee's earlier points, like, just buy buttons off them first. Just a small amount of buttons. See how that works. See how it changes what you're measuring. One of the remarkable things about this technology is they make these polymers by bioprocessing seaweed, taking the sugars out of seaweed. And the impact there is for each unit of polymer, or let's say each button, 5 buttons worth of carbon goes deep into the ocean to be sequestered. So it's like it's a rewind button. Like the more of their plastic that you put in your products, the more you will be sequestering and undoing climate change. And that's really interesting. It starts with just a button or a loop in a shoe or something like that, right? Doesn't have to be big, but over time there'll be just millions of tons of this fiber coming off lines when it gets to scale. And then the final example I would give, I mean there's many, but these are the sort of the blockbusters, is the infinite recycling business that we mentioned. I mean, the challenge with these things is, how do you integrate it into the supply chain? So when we think about recycling this T-shirt and knowing it's got cotton and nylon in it, the separation problem is incredibly difficult. And what Samsara Eco does is they use enzymes to do it. So you just get the T-shirt, you chop it up, you put it into just room temperature liquid with the enzymes in there, and 10 minutes later it's been depolymerized back to the original monomers that did come from the crude oil in the first instance. So with that technology, and they do that for nylon, they do it for polyester, they do it for PET. Again, you're making more money because the feedstock is much cheaper than crude oil is. You're using feedstock which we've actually just spent almost 100 years chucking into the landfills of the world, let alone the stuff we're still making every year with sort of industrial waste and things like that. And people don't have to change their supply chain, right? There's usually this extra little bit that actually does the depolymerization. But again, it just needs lean-in, and one of the things we've been really impressed with I gave the small example of, it could be a very small company buying buttons, but the 20% of Lululemon's fabric every year is a lot of fabric, and they haven't just said, when you're ready, we'll buy it. They've said they've actually convened meetings with all their suppliers, come into the same room. They've come up with an agreement about how this whole thing is going to work, and then everyone is focused on getting that job done over time. So it does take a little bit of effort, but I think this is how we bring transformative technologies to market pretty quickly.
So, I mean, on that spirit of collaboration and partnerships, and again, question for the entire panel, I mean, from your experience, which partnerships whether it be between regulators, banks, innovators, what's actually helped textile manufacturers decarbonize or innovate faster? And what practical lessons can Asian mills adopt now to prepare for the future? Dr. René, would you like to take that one?
I think partnerships, and we need to see partnerships need to be fit for purpose. So we've seen examples of partnerships which are trying to deal with a faster uptake of known technologies, and that's typically then a bank, because small mills would typically not have the capability to assess what's the best technology. On Monday somebody comes, on Tuesday somebody else, and on Friday they are completely lost. And the MBA, they have learned that if in doubt you don't invest. So if we can take out with the technical partnerships, the kind of the customization of the technology, take out the technology risk, get by small operators to buy together, so you cut down the price. And this was done in India, with the additional secretary was kind of referring to that. And then you can maybe also provide the finance through the vendor instead of for each of the mills separately. So that are interesting partnerships. I was also involved in other partnership which is looking at new technologies which are typically lacking a level of demonstration, so because it's a left field innovation, and I think there's lots to do with this kind of deployment facilities which were funded by a global environment facility, for example, on growing biomaterials which can be used as colorants in textiles in India, or on simple things like heat recovery from dyeing solutions, which has also been talked about for 50 years but never been cracked. So this is here, and I think if you take a global initiative, Fashion for Good, what they've done in terms of pilot projects with new technologies, they came up with the using the wastewater from iced tea for dyeing in Sri Lanka. It's now established technology. So I think that it is really a bit horses for course, and we need to look at the opportunities which are there. And I would actually like to maybe echo what Phil was also saying, that maybe we need to look at these pitch decks, but they're not as a replacement for somebody, but as a new business opportunity. So that is where we could see these new technologies don't come in as an immediate replacement, but think about it, okay, we can maybe pilot that, and then our next capacity expansion will be with this new technology. And we need to look at pathways to how this can be deployed, and it will be a little bit case-to-case customization.
Okay. Any other perspectives before we go to questions from the audience?
Maybe I just add on. For SMEs, they exist on the supply chain, and usually supply chain of large anchor buyers is really long tail. It is impossible for the anchor buyer to really measure their scope 3 without getting other players involved in the entire supply chain management. So I think one thing to note is, for example, an international hotel chain, they have adopted everybody's rating for the longest time to measure their supplier footprint. But for many years, it can't be done, because do they want to get rid of the entire supply chain of small suppliers? There's no way to manage the price, the quality. Therefore, there's no way around it except to partner with people like either the banks, the financier, or with government to give out grants and incentive. So it really calls for the entire village to get scope 3 data out of the supply chain. Anchor buyers alone can't do it.
I mean, maybe just as a last thing, we're quite comfortable with doing sort of very more, simple drop-in type of things, replace coal-fired inefficient boilers, old spinning equipment, all of this, but that's just sort of level 1, I would think, right? I mean, obviously there's space constraints, there is, you can't completely rewire an entire process, right? You might have to start with these things, but I mentioned before that we, for example, as a bank, we need to work with proven technology, right? Now, when something is proven, I guess it's content specific, right? But I think it's about that no single actor has all the vision and all the truth in this, right? So there needs to be a much denser conversation taking place between people who are willing to take the risks, and then those that cannot take that much risk, right? And then to find a way of sort of partnering up with each other. We're never good. I mean, we have a small VC program, and we have invested in stuff like PFAS-free nanofiber spinning, all of that very interesting stuff. But we're not specialists in this field, right? And we do learn from entities like Phil's and others, right? And of course, speaking to banks all the time who know their clients and the market better than anyone, and who have those long-term relationships that we need to leverage with people. So, I think it's just about finding where are others, what are others doing, and what can you do to kind of add on to that, to grow it or to make it more impactful, right? A lot of great work is being done. Maybe it's just not being talked about enough.
Well, I know Phil's got some thoughts on that, but let me weave in a question from the audience. Again, these puns get really, really bad. So if you could combine the thoughts that you have on that question with this one from the audience, which says, how can T2T, a Pakistan-based textile-to-textile recycling startup, raise strategic funding to scale its circular solutions? And what are the most effective pathways for global collaboration to accelerate impact?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about mixed capital stacks, blended finance, and so forth today. That's my starting point on it. That there's probably not one source of capital that can do it on their own. Venture capital will be worried if they're carrying the weight. Their equity will just dilute over time until they've got nothing left, and then their business model doesn't work. banks might look at it and just think that the risk is too high, but maybe they'll do a little bit at a certain interest rate. That kind of thing works. Having a little bit of an offtake, the right kind of offtake from customers in there, the right grants. And so, like, just as a very practical example, when we start these companies, we have the objective that half of the capital needed should be non-dilutive. So it should be a grant, it should be a loan. And then the whole system sort of starts to work. The point that I've sort of touched on a couple of times, and I'm going to sort of emphasize it again because I think it's a game changer if we get it right, is how do we handle offtakes? Because at the moment, offtakes are the cork in the bottle, right? There's the lack of offtakes, which are very reasonable reasons not being given, prevent the whole cycle happening. You go to a bank and say, I would like some debt, please, to fund this business, and they say, show me your offtakes, and then I can securitize the debt against those offtakes. And you say, well, customers won't give me the offtake yet because we've got to actually build the factory first. That's why I need your money. And then you end up stuck in this vicious circle. One of the things that's worked quite well in food manufacturing, for example, which could work, is offtake guarantees from governments, for example. It's one of the things we're exploring in Australia. And again, one of the biggest groups that's done this in food, they tell us they've never actually deployed $1. They've just had to guarantee the offtakes, and then everything else came together, and then that was fine. They obviously taking some risk there to sort of to get that happening. But again, I think the sort of next step down from an offtake guarantee is that customers, businesses, consider what we sort of refer to as flexible offtakes. So you kind of think of it like an offtake over 10 years, but there's sort of very clear sort of risk mitigating milestones along the way, and you're not stepping all the way into the risk as you go. But as I mentioned before, if you've really thought it through from the perspective of your business and your distribution, and if that company's right, and if that technology works, and if your hypotheses about how it can integrate into your business could have the impact you've done high fidelity mapping on, then other people will fund it. So that initially the funding could come from other people just because you've done the work. But over time, of course, it becomes a proper commercial relationship with proper offtakes. So offtakes make the world go around. So I suppose in the end, the question is what could you do to sort of step towards the offtake? Because that will just that'll pull in the rest of the capital.
That's super helpful. There's a director question here to Dr. Renee. And I read out, SMEs from the Global South working on reuse models and upcycling models will struggle with the environmental product declarations due to the current lack of data. This can leave them behind as the SMEs in the Global North mature with the EU regulations. How does this inequality get addressed?
I think this is a question which is basically unanswerable, because I mean that there's no way out that companies and also the MSMEs in the Global South will have to invest, and we can only talk about the timelines, the details of what levels of disclosure, but there's no way out. And I think this is an argument, and that's maybe not made, but let me make it. In the 80s and the 90s, Europe was putting in environmental regulations, and Australia and so on. What happened was all the polluting industries moved to the Global South. We got the whole debate has been about export of polluting industries. Now there's a next generation of environmental rules and regulations coming in, and people want to learn from what has happened. So all this imposing this on the value chains is a reflection of the fact that we don't want to drive environmental pollution and just move industries around. So we have to look at it from from different perspectives. This is not a competitiveness. This is not that was also highlighted by the our trade restrictions. This is about we are in spaceship Earth together, and then we need all to work forward, move forward, and then we just speak about timelines, levels of details, but there's no way out.
Next question is more of a financing question. I'll circle back on that if we have time. But many smaller mills say that their main barrier is not technology. It seems to be access to capital. So maybe Iris and Michael, you can take this one. Beyond large bank, more multilateral facilities, what financing models can they consider, such as local credit lines, industry cooperatives, or project aggregators to improve channeling of capital into SMEs in South and Southeast Asia? And what role do the major brands have to play in that?
It is quite related to the earlier question, where it really takes the whole village, many players to come together to support availing capital to SMEs. So in Singapore and Malaysia in particular, the government support is quite strong. So just now you mentioned about it's really availing the risk coverage to allow banks to distribute the capital to SMEs of higher risk. So that's truly happening in Singapore and Malaysia. In Singapore, we have Enterprise Singapore, which is really our government agency, giving out 70% risk cover for loans that are put in by the banks. And this 70% coverage is very meaningful because some of the project finance can go up to 30 million Sing dollars. And for working capital like your trade finance, we can go up to 10 million because of the risk cover. Malaysia, likewise, the risk cover is usually 50% for the local enterprises in Malaysia.
Phil mentioned earlier the idea of this dynamic offtake type of facility, which obviously would help a lot of the more innovative companies there. Do you see scope, or are there products out there that would provide some form of guarantee for that offtake agreement? Because ultimately it sits as a contingent liability on the balance sheet of the buyer or the offtaker at some point, and anything that would ease that burden on them would probably be something that they would gratefully accept. But is that something that you see from a commercial and a development finance point of view?
I think, Phil, what you mentioned earlier, offtake is good, but before you get to the delivery of the goods, in order to get the offtake money back, it's really the performance risk of the company. So in order to produce the goods, there's a lot of risk that goes into it to get the money back. What the bank has done really is, this concept of embedded finance is really embedding our loans through the business environment of the company, where they sell, where the buyers bill them, where the goods are delivered. In between, before the money is received from the buyer, we will finance the supplier. So that's the embedded finance concept, which is fairly new in the last 3 to 5 years. The bank plays a very active role in this, embedding our finance into different supply chain, including the marketplaces, the procurement platforms, even your HR platforms, your accounting platforms. Yeah, so I guess that's one way to think about financing with offtake agreements, but performance has to be taken out of the equation.
I think an issue for us is project size, right? So we could probably, as ADB, start looking at projects that are 10 million US and up. Frankly, otherwise, we're not going to be more attractive than other sources of
Sorry,
finance.
loan size or EBITDA?
So that
Loan size.
Yeah. So for debt, 10 million and above, that's easy for us to do. The problem is when you have a huge amount of investments that are tens of thousands of dollars, that are a few $100,000, that are in the low millions, and that will be the huge bulk of investments, right? Because especially if you break them down into individual equipment upgrades or things like this, not only by unit but also over time. You're hardly ever going to retool everything at the same time. You might, in a textile mill, just do that in a piecemeal basis. So what you have is a very large amount of very small projects. So that means you need aggregators, right? it's a little bit like energy efficiency financing, right? You need these ESCOs, these energy savings companies, to go in and really scope out what are the savings potentials, or what is the environmental improvement if we do things differently, and then to link the right financing tool to the right technology solution that you have identified. Maybe something like this needs to be done for textile clusters. I'm sure many, are working on this, but the issue is that there's limits to what we can do directly. We work with banks who can maybe go down a level, you can take a zero off, maybe they can do that level, but there's a huge amount that will be even too small for a commercial bank to look at. So what are the aggregation mechanisms? Public development banks might be able to do that. They have maybe more of a development mandate where they exist. Industry groups might help. It's, I think, maybe all of the above, right? Maybe it's things like entrepreneurship programs where you start to work with entrepreneurs to get them to a level where they can formulate projects of a certain type and size, right? Maybe it's these, it's incubators that then you link to financiers. But the issue is who provides that neutral and good faith advice, that knows enough about financing to help people formulate projects and point them in the right direction without having a conflict of interest being a financier themselves. So that's a little bit of an issue. And just one word on offtake. Obviously a hugely important factor when you look at providing debt is what is the nature and quality of your offtake agreements, right? But I think that if we zoom out and look collectively at what industry leaders like IKEA, and that's just in the home furnishing and appliance space, but look at Unilever, Mars, all of them want to source sustainably certified wood, palm oil, cocoa, whatever it might be, right? And that will only be possible, I think, through long-term offtake agreements. But how do you turn that into something that is bankable, right, for a provider of capital? How do you turn that into something that can help you invest today so that you can actually deliver over time? That's a challenge, I think, more for the financier side, working together with the forward-looking corporates that in a positive way are putting their supply chain under sustainability pressure.
Indeed. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I think with that I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Iris, Renee, Phil, Michael. Thank you for sharing your insights, and it's been a pleasure moderating this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you to all our panelists.